Okay, let's talk about the first floor, known as the Gauntlet Ruins, or the aforementioned Evil Lighthouse. Rin Svinxi, who'd been spending some time with Olivia, had told him that the light was keeping her awake at night, so you gathered your party and off you went to investigate. The Gauntlet Ruins is about 3 hours away from Otari, so you got horses to ride out there. Most of you just rode your horses, but one of you put your horse in your backpack and then declared that it weighed nothing. A weightless horse, a horse with no bulk. That sounds like something an old man would say when he's trying to teach a kid a valuable life lesson. Son, that's a horse with no bulk. Anyway, I won't name names, but it was James. So on the first floor, from a meta plot perspective, it's pretty light. The main hall was mostly collapsed, which is important because this is the only floor that you've been on so far that suffered any damage, with one exception, but we'll get to that. You fought a bunch of mitflits, you fought a bunch of maggots, you fought a pair of giant scorpions, pretty bog standard stuff really. There were scorch marks all over the first floor that implied this is where the Rose Guard and Belcora had their fateful battle, but that was never really concretely resolved. Now, over to the east, you met someone named Boss Skrang. I mean, look at this guy. He's so cute with his little crown. Anyway, he told you he just wanted to go downstairs and kill the Mushroom-eyed guys, and if you did it for him, he'd give you treasure. If I recall correctly, you doubted pretty much everything he said, but you agreed to do it anyway for some reason. Maybe just to keep him quiet? I don't know. For context, though, he was right. The mushroom-eyed folks that he referred to downstairs turned out to be Morlocks who had been displaced from their floor, and so they'd moved up, and in so doing, they had displaced the Mitflits and Boss Skrang, and had forced them to move to the top floor. They didn't want to be there. They didn't want anything to do with it. But remember that Boss Skrang had a little map of Otari that he'd drawn in the sand as if he planned on raiding them. He abandoned those plans pretty quickly when he realized just how tough the competition would be vis-a-vis you guys would murder him. Further up in the north, there was a couple of giant scorpions, and when you got past them, you saw your first mention of Nimbaloth. Nimbaloth is a god. Many knew the most about Nimbaloth. Nimbaloth is a shapeless entity known as the Empty Death who likes to consume souls that travel down the River of Souls. Really naughty stuff. Now, interestingly, Nimbaloth is said to see through will-o-wisps, which matters because you may have noticed there's an awful lot of will-o-wisps in this dungeon. Nimbaloth and their iconography is a skull with moss coming out of their mouth, and they're a very common thread throughout the entire vault and a symbol that you will see again and again and again. To the west, you found a boat. Turned out that some of Yinya's Mara's dudes had come here looking for loot, but not all of them came back. You'd find them a floor down, and not all of them made it. Turns out that they'd been caught, they were taken down to the floor with the Morlocks, and 3 of them were locked up. One of them was sacrificed in a very violent way. You rescued the 3 survivors, who now reside in Otari, having retired from the rowing boats into Cursed Dungeons game. Then you managed to enter the actual cupola of the lighthouse. Now, remember how I said before that there was an entire Gauntlet ruin that was, well, ruined, but the rest of the dungeon wasn't? Well, the actual lighthouse tower itself is also not ruined. When you got to the top, you saw the blue lens that was shining light over Otari, which would be important later when that lens would focus its gaze on the graveyard and cause all of the undead to come rising out of their tombs. And then it would teleport a giant spider as well. Anyway, eventually Olivia would find a book that would explain that these demonstrations of mystical force from the lighthouse are just some of the things that the Gauntlet ruins can do, but it can only do them about once every month or so. Now, let's talk about the Lens Workshop. There you met Tangletop, who, according to this picture, is what it would look like if E.T. the Extraterrestrial and Gollum had a baby that was addicted to plastic surgery and tropical vacations. Tangletop wanted the shiny thing from the Lens Workshop up ahead, but he was too much of a puss to go get it himself because he was afraid of Mr. Beak. Now, Mr. Beak was a doll that had a soul in it. One of you, I think it was Manny, took the soul gem out of Mr. Beak's back. A floor down, you'd learn that the soul belonged to Borbo the Goblin, who'd made a shitty deal with Volok Azrene and was now suspended in a vat like Luke Skywalker or something. The only real distinctive thing I can remember about Borbo is that in his bedroom he had a barrel full of pickles. Now, the fight with Mr. Beak was interesting because a will-o-wisp turned Valerio all confused and such, and he almost murdered Bearjum. That would have been hilarious. Well, at least hilarious to me. Now, about Volok, Mr. Beak and Tangletop both mentioned Volok Azrene to you. It was the first time you'd heard that name. Volok would be mentioned many times before you eventually meet him many floors later. Volok was a consort of Belcora's, and he was in love with her and still served her here up until this very moment. But Volok had admirers of his own, namely the ghost of a librarian a few floors down, but he only had eyes for the baddest bitch in town. So their affections for him went pretty unreciprocated. Volok was a drow, but when you met him, he was the guy in the nice suit that had turned out to be a giant humanoid mass of worms. You killed him, and then you stomped on all the worms. I think you burned some of the worms, and so he's dead, right? Right? I mean, probably because Volok was the end boss of the first book. So anyway, that's it. The first floor. With your bulkless horse in hand, you headed down to the second floor.